Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. My name is Captain Frodo, and I will be your gracious host and guide along the way of these bizarre and in-depth explorations of what it means to be a performer, or as I call it, a showman or a show person in the world. And this is, of course, a very strange time. Parts of the world is opening up, and other parts have shut down again. Australia has gone into another lockdown, so I feel privileged that Norway has gotten as far as they have with their vaccination program. Things have been opening up, and the gigs that I have been getting has happened, and the response has been just beautiful. It's been great to have the world return. So go out there, get your shots, get this world back up and running again. And these last few sojourns along the Way of the Showman has been not perhaps what most people think of as the most direct and useful advice for creating an act or doing something very direct. And what I feel like, and all these thoughts that come out now are thoughts that I have gathered and written down and are presenting to you that came out when I was too in lockdown. Last year I pretty much didn't do a single show. A few here and there, of course, each mattering so much to me. I put in so much work in each and every opportunity I had to perform, and probably advanced forwards in amount of material put on stage that I hadn't done before. That was than any other time when there's been no pandemic, so that was a good thing. But anyway, my heart goes out to all those beautiful creators out there, particularly in Australia at this time, which haven't been able to continue with the work that they got after a tough year already, to have stuff shut down again and to have seasons cancelled, new work just on the edge of happening. And then I found myself in this time that going deeper, that was what helped for me. Because when it's stormy and the waves are crashing all around us, when there's a hurricane looming as it is on America right now, then I find solace in going deep. And if you go deep enough, then nothing can really shake you. All the waves and the chaos is roiling on the surface. But if you go deep enough, then that is a kind of foundation in itself, because there is calm somewhere down there. And in these strange times, it can be good to go deep, because just like we feel dislodged from the world, I have been wondering whether this podcast over the last bit has sort of become dislodged a little bit from the sort of direct showbiz advice or whatever. But I will assure you that this is actually the point, because what I am intending to do here and what we are doing is building foundations and seeking bedrock, not for immediate use. We're not going to live in the cellar of the fundament. We're going to build a house, but our house and creation will rest on this. And it's going to rest on something which is firmer than, I'm going to do this trick and then maybe this joke, and then in the end I'll do that most impressive skill that I have. We want to get to a point that's deeper than that. And at the now point, we are at a deep point of this journey along the way. But trust me, that is to say, you can trust that this worked for me. You will, along the way or along in your life, you will find your own way and you will make your own maps. But to converse along the way with the folks from the olden days, such as myself, you might see your own course along the way sooner. You might find your guiding star and you're going, okay, well, I'm not going to start delving as deep as this guy is. This guy's just mumbo jumbo. But I also assure you that having these conversations that goes more in depth, then we're having a conversation that we quite frequently don't have in normal life. So from that, if you find your course sooner and you know where you want to go, then I think you will go a lot further than I have. And I've gone far enough for it to be a good thing. So that's a little preamble for today, where we are going to go deeper. And before we jump right into the thing, just want to thank all those beautiful fellow travelers out there, listeners who have supported me again. Daniel Raven, Natasha Proctor, Matt von Trapp, Kiara, again, thank you. And Gabe Knox, David Traps, thank you guys all so much for donating. I know these times are not the most prosperous for everyone, so thanks for going over. If anyone else likes to support the project, go to buymeacoffee.com/Captain Frodo, and the rest will be self-evident. Thank you so much. So, before we jump into the next leg of the journey, let's do a quick little recap of our inner and outer explorations from last time. I am digging in on this inner and outer thing as a sort of folk psychological way to approach what we do. It's important to remember that something is going on inside us as well as it's going on outside us, and that's what we talked about last time. If we take this as a given, then that means that there will be different types of exploration, and we can go inwards and we can go outwards and explore these and see what do we learn when we go into these two different domains. We looked last time at going out into the world, and I promised that we were going to go inwards this time, talk a little bit about meditation, and the last episode ended with me talking a little bit about my magic childhood and how growing up as the son of a magician gave me a somewhat skeptical outlook on the world. So without further ado, let's get moving. Inner exploration. There exists whole fields of methods for inner exploration. And this episode is not the forum to go into great detail about the enormous varieties that have been developed for these kinds of explorations over the millennia. This kind of investigative research goes way back. And for me, it is enough to share some of my reluctant discoveries that I've made, and I guess to testify to these methods and how effective they are and useful they can be. That's the goal, I guess, of today. So we're going to look at meditation. And I have only discovered how illuminating meditation can be in the last few years. And I'm 45 years old now, so I'm late to the game. But those who have partaken in such activities for the last few thousand years, who have found inner peace and illumination, will, I hope, refrain from saying, "We told you so," and instead just being happy for me to have discovered another way of exploring myself, the world, and the relations between the world and myself. In a very sort of straightforward way, I was introduced to meditation through Sam Harris. He was one of the so-called new atheists who in the early 2000s were releasing books that were critical to religion, and I've had a lifelong interest in religion and religious experiences from the angles of true believers, academics, and critics alike. And at that time, I read and enjoyed Richard Dawkins's God Delusion, Daniel Dennett's Breaking the Spell, Religion as a Natural Phenomenon, and also, Christopher Hitchens' God is Not Great. And they all came out there at the dawn of the new millennium. And the last book that I read in this epoch in my life's flurry of religious criticism was Sam Harris's The End of Faith. And as I read it, I was struck by the last chapter in that book, as far as I remember, which expressed an interest and fondness for Buddhism, and particularly their meditative explorations of consciousness. And I made a mental note of that. Now, these days, I think I find these kind of absolutisms more difficult to take in. I think at the time I thought it was very important that somebody had said these things, but I think I'm not quite along with all of that. But it was an interesting read, and I made a mental note of this book, which weirdly then was at the end of it, that okay, well, here's something more. This is actually quite interesting. And then years later, Sam Harris started a podcast called Waking Up, which these days actually is called Making Sense, but because he separated it into one about meditation and one, I'll get back to this. But I found that podcast, and I found that the interviews that Sam Harris was having with scientists and other luminaries resonated with me, between scientists and philosophers, and talking about a wide range of topics, many related to consciousness. Harris would every now and then talk about meditation or interview someone about the meditative practices. And I was also aware of a book that he had written with the same name as the podcast, Waking Up, which was about meditation. And I had actually read the first part of that, found it interesting, but I stopped when that book started becoming an actual sort of teaching of meditative practice, the actual steps like sit down, focus on your breathing kind of thing. I wasn't ready. Maybe it was because meditation was being brought up amongst neuroscientists, philosophers and sociologists and political analysts and cosmologists. Some of my sort of woo pseudoscience prejudices that I talked about last time, they were down. And now I got interested. I guess I was kind of ready. But it still took me a couple of years actually to gradually acclimatize to that idea. And when Sam Harris then finally released a kind of meditation app where he gives these guided meditations and has all these, it's a whole thing, lots of interviews with people and interesting people who are doing inner explorations. And I was, because I had at some point supported Sam Harris's podcast, then I was given a lifetime free access to this meditation app. And I'd like to say that I just jumped on it as soon as it released, but from when I look back at what actually happened, it took another year before I decided to try it out. So anyway, this is just all to say that I'm very happy that I did. Spending a considerable amount of time in guided meditation has been an immensely rewarding experience, and it continues to be. This inner exploration has been really eye-opening for me. It is absolutely worth the time. I used to think mindfulness and meditation was just sitting whilst trying to do nothing, which in a way it kind of is, but it's to pay attention to doing nothing, and it's not actually doing nothing at all. So but in trying to do nothing and focusing your attention, you are not doing nothing. You are actually paying attention to what's going on in your mind when you quiet things down. As your mind jumps and fleets about through many subjects and times, you discover endless aches and pains and itches and tickles that keeps dragging your mind away from just being present to what's going on in the moment. Paying attention to what's going on whilst you try to do nothing is quite a surprising undertaking. You learn a lot about just how distracted you are whilst thinking you are paying attention, and trying to discover where thoughts come from. Why does all this stuff pop into your mind? And can you in any way control it? Can you steer it? If you try to think of something, what that thought that just pops up, where did it come from? Why did it come? Did you have any free choice in bringing just that thought to it? I can certainly... Anyway, the first-person experience of paying close attention to all that's going on under the hood, so to speak, can be incredibly illuminating, and it does make you appreciate the running of the vehicle very differently. In this way, it changes your experience of all aspects of life. As someone who's been interested in attention as a foundational phenomenon for what I do and who I am as a showman, paying this close attention to attention itself has given me a much deeper understanding of what it is, how it feels, and how it operates. The mindfulness practice has been an invaluable study of attention, and on this ground alone, I would recommend all performers and showfolk to try it. Using a guided meditation app got me over the hurdle, and when it comes down to it, I don't think I would have, and I still don't think I would enjoy doing this kind of stuff face to face with even one teacher or with a bunch of strangers in some yoga studio or something. I just don't think I would manage to find time for that. Learning to pay attention to what's going on under the hood has been a very direct and useful way to explore my inner geography. One thing that stood out to me has been to experience the different impacts the varying senses has in informing me about the world. For instance, I never fully appreciated the depth of difference it is to have your eyes open versus having them closed. This seems trite and like a trivial insight, but I'm telling you that having gone through the experience of sitting and paying attention is quite an utter matter. After maybe 10 sessions of meditating with my eyes closed, I was told to do the meditation practice with my eyes open, and the difference was just amazing to experience. To really pay attention to how different sight is to sound and touch is very illuminating. Having felt and participated in these things has been surprisingly useful in creating work. That's what I find this whole chapter and all this talk that we're doing now. It is about trying to go very deep. And if you are finding yourself in a lockdown, which might go on for longer than we would have hoped, this is the time to go deep, I think. Ask some bigger questions. And one of the key lessons and participatory experiences I've had with meditation was to grasp my relationship to my own changing mental states. As you learn to pay attention to your mental states through guided meditations, to the good ones as well as to the not so good ones, you learn in a very real way that you don't have to fully identify with whatever your current set of emotions is. You are not your feelings. Feelings come and go, and you don't have to hold on to them. And in fact, you can deliberately choose to let go of any feeling that arises. And this is not easy. It's not one of those things that once you know it, you can do it all the time. But for me, there has been moments where my meditation has directly served to end an angry argument simply by me recognizing the emotions, and in a flash, I access this observing state of mind, and I recognize it from the meditation practice. And when in the midst of argument, I become aware of this emotion as something which is going on in me, but not being the same as me, I can almost instantly feel that it loses some of its intensity. In moments like that, anger and irritation can lose its grip, and boom shanka, I'm a better person for not being a grump. In the practice, I pay attention to what emotions and feelings arise, and then work on letting go of them. Then in real life, as frustration gives rise to anger, I all of a sudden, in the middle of speaking, recognize my emotional activities, and just becoming aware of it alters the intensity of the anger. That's all. And this is probably, some of you might be going like, oh, this is old news. But good on you for having discovered this earlier. I still need it. And it's not that meditation stops you getting angry, or maybe this is the case for true masters, but I doubt it. But some emotional equilibrium is probably attained. But I don't think it will ever really happen for me. For that, I have too many other things I need to do to pursue such depth of practice. Through repeated practice, though, the real experience of watching an emotion like anger, which in some sessions you try and conjure up, becomes so second nature, just watching them, that the observation of the emotion as an experience which is happening, but which is not synonymous with you, begins appearing more regularly in your life. And in meditation you discover that you get angry, but that this emotion is like a color painted over the reality of your inner geography. If you haven't spent any time exploring it, the anger feels like the truth and nothing but the truth and the one and only genuine response to the situation. By being mindful, you can discover that this isn't so. You have many options in relating to the world if you can just wash away some of that color that comes with the immediate reaction. And I still get very frustrated. I would say I probably haven't actually improved. And I do and say things that I'm not proud of in hindsight. But every now and then I recognize that I'm tensing up and going down a suboptimal route and manage to turn around. Needless to say, afterwards I feel like I just slayed a beast and that I should be crowned as a hero. But my wife doesn't always agree. Fighting your own monsters is a difficult task, and the only one to do the crowning is yourself. Eventually, though, if you keep it up, you might find that your partner or child or parents or friend notice your improvement, even if they don't give you a crown. Like most epiphanies, they can sound a bit empty without having had the experience yourself. I'm not a changed person or awakened like the Buddha. The process is ongoing and not easy for me. Progress has been made, none of it miraculous, but still, even a little step, or even a little better, is a step in the right direction. There's also lots of ways to get at inner explorations. Just actively pay attention to what's going on inside you that are not meditative. Like, for decades, my practice of understanding my inner geography was no more complex than letting my emotional and intellectual desires and other desires guide me in my life. My feelings and interests and what I liked doing was the compass that I used to orient myself. My feelings was the compass needle that sort of showed me my true north. And here it is important to remember that a compass points true north regardless of which direction you need to be going. Knowing where north is does not tell you how to get home, unless you live in Norway, in the north, perhaps. But your feelings, interests, and what you like doing might not necessarily be pointing you towards the best possible final destination, but using your inclinations as a true north, meaning knowing yourself enough to know that facing a situation you'll find yourself wanting this or that, and be expecting that to be drawn towards this or that option. To know that, but that also in that moment realize that this is happening, and then with the glorious ability we humans possess to take a step back, you can then get an overview and choose to go in a slightly different direction than our base instincts would send us, in a direction following a course that we have decided to be our true course. And although this is very similar to this thing that I describe about not identifying with your emotions. Like, we might want to do things that we know is a bad idea, and maybe this was a step in that direction. But anyway, after all, what we are looking for here in this podcast is, and what we're looking for in life, it isn't really a place, it's not a point, it is a way. We're looking for a way through it all, a way that resonates true in us, a lens which we can interpret the endless complexities of life, the universe, and everything through. A way that will fulfill us and guide us in finding meaning in ourselves and our relation to the world. It's like we're not going anywhere in particular, but we are all going. And this is where the inner, looking at the inner explorations, and that will help us also guide us in the outer world. And this is what we come back to all the time. This is going to be a balance. There is no real inner and outer. They're just concepts that we've set up because it's all completely intertwined. But to get to these through the medium of podcasting, we have to use words. And yes, a further practical method that I practiced before I did meditation to map my inner geography was to keep journals. For many years I kept an autobiographical diary. I made a decision to only write down the things that I actually did, and I hoped that this would sort of push myself to get stuff done. I didn't allow myself to write down what I was intending on doing, only the steps that had already been taken on the way to make it happen. And I thought this would lead to my diaries just being filled with ideas that never happened. And I used this as a sort of tool to spur on my productivity. At some point I found that noting down what I did from day to day was less important to me. My writings began to be more related to ideas and imaginative explorations. I am to this day a voracious note-taker, switching constantly between taking notes on my phone and in paper notebooks. And looking through these, I find that often when I was engaged in creating a new show or any other creative venture, there were themes and lines of reasoning in my notes and autobiographical journal entries that was telling me something about myself that spanned bigger periods than I was conscious of. I spoke about this a bit earlier when I spoke about the illuminated showman's manifesto, going back trying to work out where that came from, that ideas go back in the notebook, so even when they arrive fully formed, you go, oh, this has been boiling away for a while. So looking back at notes and diaries, I recognized then tendencies and interests in myself that I hadn't been able to notice until I could step back in form of reading over my notes in peace and quiet with a nice cup of tea. And in moments like this, I could and still pleasantly discover trends in my thinking and bigger patterns in myself. And that is usually how they end up appearing in my work as well, in my acts and in my shows and the little bits that I say in between my acts when I have shuffled stuff around to do a gig in a setting that I'm not normally in. As a primitive method for self-exploration, this journaling and looking back at notes has served me well. Each time I create a new act, or even more so when I create like a whole show, I'm faced with presenting myself and my material in a way that feels truthful and reflects who I am and what my preoccupations are at that particular time. That means that each creative process, whether it was to create 5 minutes of material or an hour-long performance, there's this sort of internal exploration of myself and what is meaningful and persistent in me in those moments, going back over the notes and all that. I'm representing that to the audience. And what I think and what I feel and what I'm preoccupied practicing or doing at any given time will be the resources from which I pull my next creation. And adding meditation and other more contemplative tools for inner exploration has been exceptionally valuable to my experience of my way, of this particular shaman. And as we shall see again and again, the way of the shaman is very much what emerges at the intersection of these two geographies and how what's going on inside me is expressed in the world, be it through shows or the general living of life. Because the goal is always joining the inner and the outer, and the joining, overlaying, shaping, and coming together of our outer and inner geographies is something that happens whether you pay attention to it or not. If you can learn to pay attention to its subtleties, you can learn faster, discover more, and grow as an artist and a human along the way. You are, in a sense, taking more charge of your own development. This is how I understand this adage, the harder you work, the luckier you get. Because there is always randomness and luck in anything that we do. Luck is a hard thing to pin down, but the Google dictionary defines it as something which happens apparently by chance, rather than as a result of our own actions. That is to say that if something happens by chance, it's not because of something you did. This is where the working hard comes in, because if we are consciously working and exploring our inner and outer geographies, the things we discover along the way will become more frequent. There'll just be more of them, and how they all connect up will be more apparent to you. Paying attention to what you pay attention to and being present in what's going on along the way, on the outside, actively engaged in the explorations life invariably brings. And whether you want it or not, this will serve to intensify and enrich your journey. So on a longer scope of this, here, the attention, when we start really directing the focus onto what a show is, then attention's going to be the key thing. In fact, I believe it is one of the key aspects of reality. Anyway, let's look at this, going a little bit further on this thing. The harder you work, the luckier you get, because this to me is connected to synchronicity. For this coming together of the inner and outer, this is the core of Carl Jung's concept of synchronicity. Carl Jung, famous psychologist. Anyway, synchronicity, simply stated, synchronicity is a chance happening in the external world which coincides with things going on in the internal world. That is, something happens out in the outer world that you find deeply resonant with something which is going on inside you. And Carl Jung calls this particularly meaningful coincidence, or these particular meaningful coincidences, he calls this the principle of acausal connection. That is, things that are happening by chance yet are connected. And there's been times in my life when circumstances in the outer world come together in such a way as to become a pivot of my whole life. Seemingly arbitrary events, which absolutely could or even should be thought of as completely random, combine into such an incredibly meaningful resonance that it's hard to see it as anything but significant. The significant, or the significance, is only visible to me and perhaps a few of the other people who might be involved. But as we shall see, that's enough to make a real impact on my biography and enjoyment of life. So that is as real as it gets for me. A synchronicity can be anything from you thinking about someone and then all of a sudden they call you whilst you think about them. A coincidence, absolutely. Yet you can't help but feel that there's something significant going on. You read an article about some subject only to find that your very next potential gig is for a company which deals exactly with what you just read about, making you seem on the phone like you're beyond qualified to get exactly this gig. An example from my own biography that's a little more complex. In 1998, I was living in Copenhagen and performing street shows. I was in a relationship which was far from favorable for me, and it had been toxic for a long time. And I had already been taken aside by both friends and family that was pointing out that what they were seeing was not a healthy situation. And I, of course, thought they were way off. I couldn't see it. I wasn't ready to. And I am just finishing a street show. I set out down the walking street to meet my girlfriend at the other pitch. And that day, or actually the day before, two Australian boys, Shep Huntley and Shane, the space cowboy Hulkgren, is sitting in an Amsterdam coffee shop and deciding that they want an adventure before they drive to the Edinburgh Fringe Festivals to play street shows. They have a few days up their sleeve. And that festival, the Edinburgh Fringe Festival, was at that point in time, completely unregulated for street performers and an absolute goldmine. So they decide to drive to Copenhagen to do a few shows and see what happens. And they only have time to stay for one night before having to drive all the way back and get the ferry to the UK. And the timing of their decision, all their starts and stops along the way, and me finishing my show, my girlfriend arriving at that second pitch, or pitch is the place where street performers do their shows on this walking street in Copenhagen. This timing was such that as I arrived, the space cowboy was wearing my hoodie and was chatting to my girlfriend. I guess he'd gotten cold. My girlfriend had lent him my hoodie, which I can't remember now why exactly she had that with her. But anyway. So I go over and I say hi to a guy already dressed in my clothes. And we got along very well. And I invited him and his friend Shep Huntley to come and park their van and shower and sleep in our apartment. The one that I shared with my girlfriend. And as we talked about in an earlier episode, I'd already been relying on the random kindness of strangers to take in fellow traveling showmen in a need of a place to stay. So, of course, I invited them to come to my place. And after seeing the boys do their street shows and being mightily impressed at the size and showmanship of those, we all go home to our flat, and eventually the Space Cowboy goes to bed inside our apartment and Shep Huntley sleeps in the car. And we are planning to do shows the next day, and then the boys will head back to Amsterdam. And just a sort of quick in and out for those two. No real reason in the world, but for the adventure and the joy of a little road trip. And as had happened so many times before, the night for me evolved into a giant fight with my girlfriend, and as had also happened so many times, she said that if you don't love me, then just fuck off. So we basically broke up. And the next morning, when we get up, I know that the Space Cowboy hasn't been listening to the whole thing. There's no one who can sleep through that. Or perhaps he actually could, as I got to know him better, then I learned that he indeed can be a very deep sleeper. But as it was, he did hear what went on that night. Then he tells Shep about it. Shep then comes over and says he heard that shit went down real bad and that him and the Space Cowboy was wondering if, since there didn't seem to be anything for me in Copenhagen now, how about coming along with them? So I said yes, instantly, on the spot, and it was one of the best things ever to happen in my life. It's what really made me a successful street performer. That Edinburgh Festival was also how I hooked up with the Kamikaze Freak Show, which I spoke of earlier, and this again led to Shep, Shane, Space Cowboy that is, and myself getting the idea to start a sideshow of our own, which became reality with Tiger Lil and was called the Happy Sideshow. This again brought me to Australia, meeting these people, and this got me into Circus Oz, which finally led to a 12-year stint with La Clique or La Soirée, and meeting my wife and collaborator in making a baby daughter. So, needless to say, the absolute random events of two lives, or three, colliding at exactly the night where my entire world collapsed and crashed down all around me in a relationship that was broken but where I could not let go. I had previously left, gone back to Norway on a ferry, but then I came crawling back with my tail between my legs, and this encounter with these boys offered a clean break and a brand new beginning. It was the one night upon which all which has made me who I am today pivoted. You could say it's a coincidence. You could say it's luck or chance, but the significance of this for me and for those two Australian boys is such that luck or chance just don't cut it. This, to me, is synchronicity. The outer world came to offer up an opportunity which completely resonated with my inner turmoil. Jung's example in his book about synchronicity offers an example of a patient who was so rigid and scientific in her thinking that it had become a major problem in her life. Perhaps there was a touch of the obsessive-compulsive. She told Jung about a dream she had where someone gave her a golden necklace with an Egyptian scarab beetle. And then as she is telling the story of her dream, there is a bumping sound on the window, not just once, but repeatedly. So Carl Jung gets up from his chair, goes over to the window to see what it is, and opens the window, and as he does so, an insect flies in, and he snatches it out of the air, and when he opens his hand for them both to see, there is a golden, green, shimmering scarab looking back at them. And this became the turning point for this woman's treatment. the seemingly random event which became screamingly meaningful in the experience of the patient and therapist set her on a new path and set Jung on a lifelong quest to understand the significance of these strangely meaningful coincidences. As an exercise, it can be hugely illuminating to explore one's own past for times like this. Plowing through your biographical memory, ask yourself, when did events in my life conspire to create meaningful coincidences? By deliberately seeking them out in your past, chances are you become better at spotting them in the present. Seeking to discover synchronicities is a particular mode, a particular way of paying attention. It's a kind of open awareness of seeking connections. And whether you're in the market for a new job, a new lover, or a relationship that goes deeper than hooking up, or creating a new act, and you're in search of inspiration as to how to marry 2 or 3 disparate ideas into a beautiful whole, into one act, this paying attention in this kind of way, or paying this kind of attention, learning to seek out and see potential synchronicities, can be very valuable to discover the connections that are just beneath the surface. And by examining your inner and outer geographies and searching for points where they come together, you might find that meaningful coincidences starts to happen more frequently. Or at least you notice them, and why wouldn't they? Chances of finding something is greatly increased by looking for it. These synchronicities are worthy of sincere exploration for inspiration as potential creations, as well as directions and course corrections for your life. Jung mentions dreams, symbols, numbers, conversations, and spontaneous encounters as domains to keep inside your open awareness. But as you carry through all these odd liminal links, you might worry that the connections you see are just something you make up in your mind. And that might be so. Jung goes through, or goes on in some considerable length in his book that synchronicities might just be chance. But be that as it may, you have the power to make the connections real by acting upon them as if they are real. If you're looking for a partner and some meaningful coincidence brings you together with someone, then it doesn't matter if the links were made up or real, whatever that actually means, because they were made real by you acting upon them. Maybe Shep and the cowboy came to Copenhagen for no reason, but as our now personal shared biography tells that story, it's obvious that they came to pick me up. That is as true a story as any that could be told about those odd events that happened back in Copenhagen in 1998. They came to pick me up. They didn't know, perhaps, that that's why they went. But when they left, and we were all in a van together, we all knew that this was the truth. If the world seems to fall into place when crazy things, or even sequences of normal things which stands out to you as deeply relevant, this is the coming together of the 2 geographies, the outer and the inner. In my experience, this has proven to be of great significance, and it should always be paid attention to as signposts, moments when our 2 geographies come together. When the map and the territory touch, one does well to pay attention. So I leave you with some more afterthoughts on this whole meditation thing, because I meditated practically daily for about a whole year. Then the pandemic hit and I fell out of the loop. I kept doing it, but not every day. And now, another year down the line, I still meditate, but it is intermittent now. Do it for a few days here and there. Part of me wishes that not that I could find time to do it daily again, because there's always time, but that I could find it in myself to make the time, to take the time. But maybe I will. Anyway, I still recognize it as something very important, and this gets reiterated to me every time I get back into it. But why do I feel it pertinent to mention now to you that I'm no longer a daily practitioner of meditation, particularly after all the stuff I said about how good it had been. And that's just to make the point that not everything can be or is a lifelong path. Not everything becomes the big thing. Like any study or aspect of your life, you can expand through it, be it intellectually, physically, or, you take a poetry writing class or leadership or coaching course. It can enrich you, but not everything stays important every day throughout your life. For me, performance has been this. Showmanship. Anyway, the act of seeking out things with the aim of having aspects of it blend and interact with you and your own process as an artist and human, this is the real benefit. It's way more important to be on a path to develop than to all the time think that you have found the thing. There might be a whole new domain or whole new domains of fuel for your internal fire out there in your outer geography or in your inner geography. And each sidetrack that you'd later on think is a sidetrack might be a glorious discovery, fun in the moment, or something that you then discover later on in another project, that it becomes the core idea in that. And the point in all the explorations is to find what modes of inner exploration and world explorations works for you. It's when we bring our findings and understandings of these two geographies together that we arrive at authentic expressions of ourselves, not just as performers, but in our lives in general. These two geographies exist as invitations, each beckoning you, me, and everyone to engage more deeply. Each of the two is like an invitation for growth. The project we are undertaking along the way of the ShowMan is to expand our horizon, or our horizons, and to work on ourselves as well as our art and our craft. And to do this, we need to always keep one eye on each horizon, one on the inner and one on the outer, whilst steadily walking straight along the way. And just like that, another leg along the way comes to an end. I am constantly struck at the beautiful feedback that I get when I get it, at how much people enjoy it. And I haven't asked anyone to write a review for a long time, and so nobody has. But so far the podcast has all the reviews on all the different iTunes stores or whatever. They are all very, very excellent. And if you could do me the favor, if you have listened and you like where this is going, then it would be really brilliant if you could go over to iTunes, click down there and leave a review and a 5-star thing saying how much you have enjoyed it or why you find it meaningful. That would be a great help. And also, of course, if you could share this podcast with one or two of your friends, someone who you think might benefit from it, point them towards your favorite episode and say, maybe this could help in one way or another, or maybe this would make you laugh. That would be great, because if there was one thing that I would wish for this season is that we would grow our listenership, and the best way to do that is not for me to tell people that it is good. It is much more trustworthy if it comes from someone who has listened to it and has that belief themselves. I hope that person is you. Thank you so much for listening. And that's all I have to say for today. So with that, all that's left to be said is take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.